Joining us now is Congressman Ro Khanna. He's a friend of the show. We always appreciate you joining us, sir. And whenever you're here in Washington, and our audience always wants to hear what you have to say.
So well, it's increased my name recognition amongst Capitol Police.
You've
got that's your demographic.
Yeah, I was telling you, we have a shocking audience amongst the Capitol Police. Yeah, every time I'm on Capitol Hill, we can see some of that. So I wanted to ask you about some of these things that are happening here in Washington. Something Crystal in particular really wanted to speak with you about was the idea of conditioning U.S. military aid to Israel based upon either having to abide with the international humanitarian rules, the Leahy Amendment, and all of that. I know that's something that you've been involved in. So give us your thoughts on some of the actions going on behind the scenes.
Well, first of all, I've called for a permanent ceasefire. We just need an end to this cycle of violence and the release of all the hostages. But the aid should be following the Leahy law. I don't understand why this is controversial. We have a law in the United States. It's called the Leahy law. It says that any aid to any country has to uphold human rights standards, international law standards. The problem is that the State Department hasn't been enforcing the Leahy law in cases. And what I've said is that that has to be enforced. If we are going to pass an aid package, we should explicitly say that it should be upholding the Leahy law.
Well, so on the permanent ceasefire point, I guess if we want to steelman the position, what the pro-Israel side would say is your only ceasefires are going to help Hamas. It's going to help them regroup. This will not allow us to rid Hamas of the population inside of Gaza. Is that even an attainable goal in your view? If we have a permanent ceasefire, what would the next step be for people who are advocating for that policy?
So I had said Israel has the right to self-defense. When the brutal attack happened, I unambiguously condemned it. But Israel has diminished significantly at this point Hamas's military capability in northern Gaza. Now, there are 45,000 Hamas fighters. Israel has killed probably 1,000 to 3,000, depending on whose estimate you believe. Macron is saying that it would take 10 years of a war to eradicate Israel. And when you talk to Israel's or our allies in the Gulf, they'll tell you the same thing. So, A, it's an unachievable goal. I guess if you were going to try to achieve it, it would mean massive civilian casualties. And we've all seen the women, the children who are being killed. I mean, it's heartrending. And you can't have 100, 200, 300,000 casualties or the entire expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza.
What do you think should come next? We had a whole segment on our show here, Kamala Harris saying the Palestinian Authority needs to be revitalized. Do you think the Palestinian Authority is a legitimate actor that could take over governance? What is your view of what the next phase of this should look like? We have a ceasefire. Now we have to do governance, possibly elections. Who is legitimate? Who is not? What should that look like in your view?
Well, I don't think it should be the United States dictating who is at the table. I think we want to have every Palestinian voice under the condition that they recognize Israel's right to exist and they renounce violence, which has been the precondition for those negotiations, but then have the diverse factions of Palestine represented. So you have a Palestinian state with equal rights and Israel obviously at the table as well. The problem the United States made is for years we thought we could just ignore the Palestinian issue. And they tried the Abraham Accords. They didn't have Palestinians have a voice for a state. And now people are realizing that's not going to work.
So what is your view then? You're an ally of the president. I know he talks to you from time to time. What's your assessment of how the Biden administration has handled this so far? What do you think?
I don't agree fully with the way that they've handled it. I mean, obviously, I'm calling for a permanent ceasefire. I thought initially the statement that Israel has a right to defend itself was completely fine. I thought the unambiguous condemnation of Hamas and the attacks were fine. But I don't think we should have bear hugged Netanyahu, which gave a far-right government in Israel way too much of a green light to have the bombing that they did. These should have been much more surgical strikes against Hamas perpetrators who committed the attacks. And that, to me, was where I had disagreements with the administration.
What do you make of the general ubiquity of support for Israel amongst the Democratic Party? One of the things that we covered here today was that 60-something% of Democrats disapprove of Israeli military action inside of Gaza. I believe you said 40-some people have called on for a permanent ceasefire, but it's nonetheless not even representative of voters and all that. Have you heard organic pushback on this, or do you worry about electoral consequences as a result of this policy?
I do worry about the losing young people, losing minorities, not just Muslim Americans or Arab Americans, but voters of color. I worry about it in the battleground states. And I think that you can stand with Israel, condemn October 7th, unambiguously condemn the horrors, the rape, the 1,200 people who were killed, and still say that we also recognize the dignity, the value of Palestinian lives. Here's what I'm hearing from people who, and I don't think this is fully understood, that they don't see American policymakers expressing the same empathy, the same value for the Palestinian children, for the Palestinian women being killed as they do for people who are Israeli or European. And we have to make sure that we as a country in a multiracial democracy say that every human life has value. And that, to me, is really what's driving some of the anger among young people, progressives, and minority communities in America.
What do you make of some of the ongoing heightened attacks on U.S. forces? And I know you've got a lot of I know you spend a lot of time thinking about foreign policy as well. This is something that's worried me particularly, about attacks on not only U.S. troops, but now we've had multiple weird incidents in the Red Sea. We've got Houthi drone attacks and all that. Do you think that's derivative largely of what Israel is doing inside of Gaza? Is it of U.S. support, or is this just part of the inflamed tensions of unleashed a lot of tension that was already simmering behind the scenes? And what do you think of the Biden administration's handling of it so far?
I think the latter. I think you have a conflict that is escalating. This is why we need a permanent ceasefire to ratchet down the tension so we don't get drawn in to a Middle East conflict. I mean, some of it is a remnant of the Yemen war, which where the Houthis were fighting the Saudis, and that was a foreign policy mistake. The president has corrected course on Yemen, which I give him credit for. But overall, what I would say is that the administration needs to figure out a way for the bombing and the war to end. And once you have a permanent ceasefire with the release of all hostages, then I think you can start to ratchet down the tensions and lessen the likelihood, not just of the United States getting into a war, but an attack on the United States.
Yeah, that's something I'm deeply worried about. I also wanted to ask you something. I know Crystal was particularly up about this. Let's put this please up there on the screen. It's about a new House resolution, which could be voted on very early, which, quote, clearly firmly states that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I know that there were previous statements and resolutions that had passed the House. What do you make of this resolution, which I know even people like Jerry Nadler have spoken out against?
I'll be voting no. Look, I voted for resolutions to say we do not want any anti-Semitism on college campuses. And I recognize the genuine fear of anti-Semitism in this country. I mean, there are Jewish Americans who tell me they're changing their names when they're getting on cab drivers.
Right.
And that's a real issue. But you can't say a resolution like this basically says if you're criticizing the Netanyahu government, if you're criticizing the Netanyahu's policies on annexation, if you're calling for a Palestinian state and saying that Palestinians have legitimate grievances against occupation, then you may be seen as anti-Semitic. And I don't think that the criticisms of Israeli policy should in any way be equated to anti-Semitism. That diminishes actually what anti-Semitism is.
When you speak with your colleagues generally, what is the feeling behind the scenes? You have 40-some people now calling for a permanent ceasefire. Do you think that the overall sentiment is beginning to grow? Like, do you think that there may be a particular event may push things? Because it does seem that things, at least on the Democratic side, are trending in a very different direction. Even when you look at the Senate, people like Mark Warner and others who have said things very, disconsonant with the current U.S. policy towards Israel and its military action.
I would say the last 2 weeks there has started to be a shift. Both the scenes of the bombings and the children, the women, the devastation. I mean, people have seen that from a human perspective, but also the fact that we did have a temporary ceasefire. Hostages did start to be released. That shows that through diplomacy we can get all the hostages out and a diplomatic solution and end to the violence. So there was hope there. Even the president was saying, I hope this is lasting, but now we've got to move beyond hope to making it lasting. Just one basic point. The Gaza war in 2021 ended when Biden called up Netanyahu and he said, that's it. The runway's ended. And Netanyahu was the hours before saying, we're going to continue, we're going to continue. An hour later, they stopped. Reagan, when he called up the Israeli prime minister in 1982, they stopped within hours. Reagan said to someone, I didn't know I had that much power. So the American policymakers have a lot of power here.
Well, Congressman, we always appreciate you joining us. I'm sorry Crystal wasn't able to join us, but we always appreciate your views, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Saagar.
Absolutely.
Hey, guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.